Thank you. So good evening, everyone. I'm Tom Lazell. I'm the Climate Adaptation Lead at the Oxfordshire County Council. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes giving some insights into how climate change is already affecting Oxfordshire and how it will continue to do so into the future. And I want to just start by framing the discussion slightly and being clear on what we mean by the term climate adaptation, because it's a term that causes quite a lot of confusion having the word climate in. In this respect, we're not talking about decarbonisation or kind of renewable energy or energy efficiency. Whilst they are all important aspects, what we're referring to with climate adaptation is how we minimise the impacts of climate change that we're already seeing. So in the UK, we're already seeing warmer, wetter winters. We're seeing more intense, frequent weather extremes, and we're seeing hotter and drier summers. So these are some of the impacts that we are already experiencing, and we need to minimise, and that means altering our behaviour, our systems, and in some cases our way of life, to protect our families, the economy, and the environment in which we live from the impacts of climate change. So we can see this as a proactive approach to dealing with climate change. And there's lots of benefits to doing this. So we can improve where we live, we can make it greener, healthier, and safer. We can help make our communities stronger so that they're better able to cope and recover from shocks, especially those who are more vulnerable. We can cut the damage to our homes, to our workplaces, and some of the essential services that we rely on.
Tom, can I stop you real quick? Sorry. Is it possible to put it into presentation mode just so that it's
not really
bigger?
Sorry.
We can just see the introductory slide and we can see the slide sorter view.
How do I...
You click on the bottom right hand buttons, presentation mode.
Well, I thought I was.
Control P.
Hey.
No, that's print.
That one's to print.
Well, could you...
At the top, you've got on the menu, you've got slideshow. And if you click in there, then one of the options in there is start from the beginning.
Might just be because if you've got two screens on, Tom, maybe because you're sharing the wrong one.
Do you want me to share it, Tom?
Yeah, could you? Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hooray.
Yeah.
Thank you. So so yeah, I think that's where I was. So yeah, so just wanted to kind of frame that discussion slightly on what we're referring to with climate adaptation. Next slide, please, Catherine. So just starting with Oxfordshire's current climate, and it's fair to say that Oxfordshire's climate has already changed and has been since the 19th century. Since the chart at the bottom of the screen shows the average annual temperature change since the 1800s, and you can see that there's been an increase in the average annual temperature of around 1.3 degrees Celsius on average, with much of that change happening over the last 20 years or so. Whilst 1.3 degrees Celsius doesn't sound like a significant increase, it's leading to much more extreme weather in Oxfordshire. So, for example, in 2022, we recorded a new maximum temperature for Oxfordshire of 38.1 degrees Celsius. And this year, 2025, has been the hottest year on record overall, with 4 separate heat waves. but also last year in September 2024 was Oxford's wettest month since 1774. And somewhat implausibly, the first 7 months of this year were the driest since 1976. So the climate is becoming much more volatile, much less predictable in Oxfordshire. So despite the average temperature only increasing by 1.3 degrees Celsius, the extremes are getting much more serious. And we can characterize Oxfordshire's current climate by kind of 5 different weather impacts. So flooding being the most the best understood, windstorms being another. Cold snaps are becoming less likely, but still important. Heat waves are becoming much more frequent, much more severe, and a very serious climate impact, as well as droughts. Next slide, please. So in terms of looking ahead into the future and global climate trajectories, and what the climate might look like in the future, bearing in mind we're already at 1.3 degrees Celsius. The Paris Agreement, signed back more than 10 years ago now, in 2015, signed by more than 197 countries, set a goal to limit warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius above industrial levels, with efforts to limit the increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. There should be a chart there, but below, but there isn't. There we go. Based on current progress that we've made against those targets set 10 years ago, it's technically feasible to achieve 1.5 degrees Celsius, but in all realism, we're currently looking at least 2 degrees Celsius of warming, which is a significant increase on the 1.3 degrees Celsius we've already experienced. So we can expect accelerated and increased climate change and associated weather impacts going forward. Next slide, please. So what might that climate change in the future look like? So there are several impacts that we can expect. I've already mentioned heat waves, and we can expect them to continue to increase in the severity and frequency. Also, an increase in short duration rainfall extremes leading to localized flash flooding. There's the potential for significant increases in the occurrence of slow-moving storms with potentials for large precipitation accumulations locally. Extreme windstorms are projected to increase across the UK, along with increases in lightning. And there's also the potential for increased severe hail across the UK. As I mentioned, there'll be fewer cold snaps in the future as well. So many of these are quite difficult to anticipate. They're quite difficult to estimate with kind of very limited data available. So a lot of the focus that we've been looking at is on heat waves, increasing temperatures, as well as rainfall extremes and flooding, which are likely to and expected to have the greatest impact on Oxfordshire, and are things that we can estimate going forward. Next slide, please, Catherine. So back in 2023, we commissioned Atkins to undertake a study to look at future extreme temperatures and rainfall. This was due to the mounting evidence suggesting that actually extremes are being underestimated. So, for example, the record temperatures of 2022 were far greater than modelled by the Met Office's own modelling. They had only anticipated the 2022 record temperatures by around 2050. So the County Council undertook this study and used climate attribution studies to provide more accurate assessments of future climate change in the form of looking at future daily maximum temperatures and daily maximum rainfall for both medium emission scenarios, but also higher emission scenarios, so that we're kind of future proofing against all possibilities. So next slide, please. And what that produced in terms of the key outputs was mapping at a very granular level across Oxfordshire, as you can see on the left-hand side. The resolution going down to 1 kilometre resolution, so each individual dot that you can just about make out is 1 kilometre. And that shows the extreme kind of variation of both temperatures and rainfall across the county. And the report provided a range of useful information, which I can't present all of it now, but I can provide some snapshots in terms of what the future temperatures might look like. So if we follow a medium emission scenario of around 2 degrees Celsius, which we might be on the lines of following, we may see daily temperatures of nearly 44 degrees Celsius by 2055. So that compares against the 38 degrees Celsius that we experienced in 2022. So a fairly substantial increase even on that. Also by 2055, daily rainfall may achieve 118 millimeters in a single day. That compares with 193 millimeters of rainfall for the whole of September last year, which in itself was the wettest month since 1774. So there's significant potential based on this study for Oxfordshire's climate to become much more extreme, and so we're going to have to find ways to minimize the impacts of that. Next slide, please. So looking at how the climate is going to change is one aspect, but we also need to consider the vulnerability and the exposure of the population of Oxfordshire and the communities within it, as well as the assets and the natural environment. So we undertook a climate vulnerability assessment as part of this, and that aimed to provide a spatial assessment, so including more very granular mapping to highlight the adaptation priorities at the local level across Oxfordshire. And that looked at both current and future risk across 4 key themes, so a very broad scope, including critical infrastructure, health, communities, and the built environment, as well as the natural environment and business and industry. Next slide, please. So in terms of what the climate vulnerability assessment does, it looks at, as I say, climate risk across the county. In terms of defining climate risk, there are 3 components. So first of all, it's the hazard itself. So what's the weather hazard that we're looking at, whether it's heat wave or flooding or drought or so forth. So we need to consider that, and the degree of impact that has is dependent on things like urban land cover and percentage of green space. But we also need to consider the vulnerability of the people and assets within a particular area. And vulnerability is determined by a range of different social adaptive indicators, but as part of this study, we focused on the percentage of the population under the age of 15, so they're particularly vulnerable. Also, the percentage with a disability, the percentage older than 75, as well as rented households who are typically less rooted in their communities with fewer kind of support mechanisms in place, as well as the more deprived areas of the county who have fewer resources to adapt. Combining that with the exposure element as well, so that's typically the exposure of those people and assets to the hazards. So that might include things like the quality of housing that they live in. Combining all of these three things, we can start to calculate the risk across the county and then map that and the variation of that. Next slide, please. And so we come up with some both flood risk mapping and heat wave mapping. So in this case, the flood risk mapping shows the key wards which are particularly vulnerable both now and into 2050. So Blackbird Leys, Donington, Littlemore, Marston and Northfield Brook are currently some of the most vulnerable in the county, but also will be by 2050. Holywell and Hinksey Park are currently vulnerable, but the risk associated with them is expected to reduce. We've also got some of the wards in Witney as well, which are have high climate risk scores associated with them. So we can really start to focus in on which parts of the county we need to be focusing on helping to adapt and build resilience. And this is for flooding, so both surface water flooding and fluvial flooding. And on the next slide, we have the heatwave risk mapping, which follows a similar approach. Similar wards are prioritized in terms of which are the most have the greatest climate risk scores. So several in Oxford again, including Blackbird Leys, Barton and Sandhills, and so forth. And then on the next slide, we just got a clearer view of the wards which are particularly at risk. So if we look at the top right quadrant, we can see those wards which have both the greatest heat risk score as well as the greatest flood risk score. And the size of the bubble there denotes the population size. So, so this helps us guide our approach going forward. Next slide, please, Catherine. And I just want to put a bit more focus on the heat risk element, which I think there's quite a lot of misunderstanding around heat risk. I think whenever we have a heat wave, lots of pictures of people being on the beach and so forth, and it's all great, but actually extreme heat will have an increasingly significant impact on mortality and morbidity levels across Oxfordshire. The 2022 heat wave led to an estimated 2,985 excess deaths, although I think that's quite significantly underestimated the real number. And when you consider that heat combined with the high humidity levels that the UK often exhibits, so the wet bulb temperature, that combination is particularly dangerous for human health. So particularly those vulnerable groups that I mentioned earlier, the very elderly, the very young, and those with particular disabilities and so forth. So it's something that we need to, going forward, take a much stronger approach on. And at the bottom, we can just see some of the range of temperatures which we need to consider. So the Met Office considers a heat wave above 27 degrees Celsius for 3 consecutive days. That is quite a high temperature for a heat wave. Actually, the risk is below that. And you can see in the center of the screen that actually the wet bulb temperature means that the risky temperatures are much lower because it's taking into account the humidity as well. So there is advice on the government website on protecting against this heat, particularly helping the vulnerable people, those in care homes and the very young at school, for example, can be particularly impacted by these temperatures. So yeah, I just wanted to focus on heat there, but if we can move on to the next slide, we can see just the range of impacts that Oxfordshire's residents and businesses, the range of that they can be affected by. So illness and disease being one. Overheating is a really significant issue in homes and buildings. Many of our homes are suited to staying warm in winter, but they're not well ventilated, so they retain the heat in summer, which can be very dangerous. There's particular risks to agriculture. Anyone who's seen Clarkson's farm will see the impact that weather extremes have on agricultural crops and so forth. And that has an impact on our our food security and supply. So there's a range of different impacts, water scarcity being another one as well. Oxfordshire is expected to become water scarce by 2040, despite all the rainfall that we get at times of the year. So a range of impacts there. Next slide, please. I just want to finish off. My colleagues will be spending the rest of the evening talking about the support available so that we can mitigate these risks. So there's lots of positive things we can do, and I just want to touch upon the climate change adaptation route map, which Councillor Roberts mentioned at the start of this workshop. So this is our long-term approach, not only for the county council, but all our district councils as well, and other partners. This is our approach for adapting to climate change going forward. It's a long-term strategy. It contains more than 82 actions, and since the start of this year, we've started working on implementing those actions. So there's lots of positive things we can do at a local level to reduce our vulnerability in Oxfordshire and become more resilient to climate change going forward. So that's, I think, all from me. I'm just going to hand over to Sam Randall now, who's going to talk about some of the language and how we communicate climate adaptation.
All right. Is everyone able to see the full screen presentation?
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom, for that. So my presentation is just a little bit about how we should go about talking about adaptation in the kind of local community context. It's not always that we will have the privilege that we have today of gathering a coalition of the willing to talk about climate adaptation, going into depth in some of the technical details, and kind of giving the scientific overview in the way that Tom has just then. So mine's just a short presentation on some of the tips and things to avoid when talking about adaptation. And the first one is, ideally, you would avoid using the word adaptation. And perhaps controversially, you might also want to avoid talking a little bit about climate change, because as soon as you mention climate change, people start to think about mitigation. They think about solar panels, they think about maybe heat pumps, or they think about wind farms. But what you want to do when focusing on adaptation is get people thinking about impacts in their life. So I just want to start by saying that people are really concerned about the impacts of climate change, and they already do feel like they're feeling them, whether they be heat waves or flooding, or perhaps one step removed, increases in food prices. And when it comes to heat waves, we know that 70% know someone who experienced discomfort during a heat wave. That's in Britain. And also that 70% also thought heat waves could be more prevalent in the future, and that they were actually quite concerned about that. And we can see that as this kind of survey has repeated over time, that has become more and more the case. So, summarizing there, avoid using the term adaptation. And instead talk a lot more about extreme weather. And you want to bring the extreme weather events close to home. It's very easy to focus on the far off things like bushfires in Australia, flooding, flash flooding in Spain, deluges in India or Bangladesh. But we want to remind people that actually those extreme weather events are going to be prevalent, more prevalent than they currently are, very locally. So when you're engaging members of the community, you want to reinforce that we are already facing extreme weather events in Oxfordshire, that they're going to get worse, and if possible, ground them in actual recent examples that people would have experienced. So you might want to talk about Storm Henk or Storm Bert, which are good recent choices for flooding and extreme rain, heavy rainfall, or perhaps the more recent 2022 and 2025 heat waves. In the most recent 2025 heat wave, there were over 200 fire alerts or calls for wildfires that the Oxfordshire Fire Service responded to. So people might actually already be aware of events that we think are a bit more uncommon in the UK. So ground them, connect those global extreme weather events to the very local experiences that people already would have been privy to. So you could ask them about how they've experienced those events personally, or if they know a friend who was impacted, or perhaps a neighbor down the road. And you can ground them in very small experiences, like not being able to take a child to school just one day, or something bigger, not being able to access insurance perhaps for flood risk in your home. So bring that close to home. Next slide. The next one is you want to find shared values to cut across political views, views about the world, cultural differences, and you want to be very specific about the impact of concern. So you want to avoid high-level things, high-level terms, as I've said, such as adaptation, climate risk, maybe even avoid extreme weather because it's quite vague. And instead, you want to say, when you're setting up a project or an outreach campaign, you want to talk about specific things like helping grandparents stay cool during heat waves. That grounds it in the kind of very personal. It's about a specific kind of event, or it could be talking about protecting your home from flooding. If you're going to talk about adaptation, it might just generate some blank stares. But when you talk about these kind of events, or these kinds of people, or these kinds of infrastructure assets that might be impacted, it very quickly grounds it in something that's worth caring about, that's not abstract. And you could do it for all sorts of things. So it could be the grandparents, it could be children going to school, or it could be your local community group not being able to run because it's too hot. So see if you can tie it to a particular kind of event and a particular kind of group when talking about it. Generally speaking, themes or values that cut across all kinds of demographics for the UK. Future generations come up frequently, something that people care about, and within Oxfordshire as well. Our own research suggests that. Supporting the vulnerable and talking specifically about people's health. Those are all things that help to make adaptation seem like something that is common sense rather than political or controversial. And finally, when discussing adaptation, heat waves or flooding, you want to not just talk about this being a problem, because that's going to leave people feeling a sense of despair. You want to always communicate it with some kind of solution, and preferably solutions that can be done for people with varying levels of engagement. So it could be clearing your gutter in case of extreme weather to minimize the risk of a leak. Or it could be talking about flood alerts and how you're going to set up community flood alerts. Or it could go all the way up to something like running community drills. But yes, I'd advise against talking about climate adaptation and specific risks without also presenting some options for people. Otherwise, they're going to disengage. That's all. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Sam. I think that good tips and also a good sort of big picture overview of what we're looking at here in Oxfordshire from Tom. So appreciate that from both of you. We are now going to have Becky Micklem talk about, is the landscape and nature recovery lead for the County Council, talking about the local nature recovery strategy. And I don't want to steal your thunder, Becky, but the launch was just this week, and it was a room of very enthusiastic, sort of positive, hopeful people, a lot of work to do, but yeah, a really great event. And so yeah, I'll turn it over to you, Becky, and I am going to try and share your presentation. So here goes.
Thanks, Catherine. And I have to apologise to you in advance. Having said I'd like you to share my slides, I would very much like you to do that. But there are stages where there's a lot of clicking, so I hope you're prepared for that.
Let's see. I would like to do that. It's trying. It wants to. Okay, can folks see that? Okay. Or Becky can at least you see that?
Yeah, I can see it. So, yeah, okay, excellent. Thanks, Catherine. So thank you for the introduction. Yes, we launched our local nature recovery strategy just last week, so this is all very hot off the press. And in this presentation, I will go through with you what the local nature recovery strategy contains. From this point onwards, I'm going to refer it to the LNRS because otherwise it's a bit of a mouthful. So hopefully this will be a tool that you can help you support nature recovery locally. Before I go into the detail of that, I thought it would be helpful to reflect briefly on the links between nature recovery and climate adaptation. Catherine, could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So, as I'm sure most people on this call are aware, nature in the UK is at risk. Unfortunately, we're one of the most nature-polluted countries in the world. Nearly 1 in 6 of our species are at risk of extinction, and we've seen a 19% decline in abundance of species since 1970. Those are pretty depressing statistics. Most of those declines have been due to habitat loss and fragmentation as a result of human land use competing with nature, mostly through intensive agriculture and development. However, climate change is an increasing threat, and in its depleted and fragmented state, our nature is particularly vulnerable. Next slide, please. Thank you. I won't go into this in detail because Tom has very professionally gone through the climate change impacts we expect to see. All of these heat waves, drought, flooding, extreme weather events, and sorry, Sam, I know I'm not supposed to say that, they will all affect nature as well. I just wanted to flag, we're also seeing changes in the timing of the seasons, which perhaps as humans doesn't affect us so much, but it affects nature. So we're seeing spring advancing by 2.5 days per decade. Plants are flowering and fruiting earlier, and leaf fall is delayed. And those changes can affect food chains, with some species that rely on one another falling out of sync. Climate change is happening at such a rapid pace and at sufficient magnitude that many species and habitats will increasingly find themselves exposed to environmental conditions that don't support their survival. Next slide, please. So what can we do to help nature recover? There are 2 key things that are needed. So that's a high diversity in natural populations. So we know if we have high species diversity, that can help nature to successfully adapt to climate change in the long term. So we need to halt and reverse declines in species to support long-term adaptation. But it's expected that species will struggle to adapt quickly enough to climate change. So therefore, their best chances of survival will be to have the chance to move and migrate in order to find new locations with suitable environmental conditions. That requires a joined up network of varied habitats to enable species to move. So it's really important that we create a larger network for nature, which is bigger, better, and more joined up to increase resilience. The good thing about helping nature is it also helps us to adapt to climate change. So there are various benefits we get from having high biodiversity, which are summarised in the diagram on this slide. And there are particular features of that which help us with climate adaptation. And mitigation. So our habitats can help store carbon, not only woodlands, but ancient grasslands, wetlands can store large amounts of carbon, particularly in their soils. So conserving those habitats is really important. But nature can also help us with urban cooling when it's integrated into the urban environment, so helping with those heat waves. And in particular, nature can help us with natural flood management. So if we can connect rivers to their natural floodplains upstream of vulnerable places, then that can help reduce flood risk. Next slide, please, Catherine. So on to the local nature recovery strategy. So whilst Oxfordshire County Council led on production of the strategy, it was done in partnership with a large number of different people, including the partners on this slide, over a period of 2 years. So we did quite a lot of engagement on that. There's a QR code on this page that you can follow because the LNRS is now online. Next slide, please, Catherine. And this is just quite a nice diagram that was produced during the early stages of our consultation. And it helps capture some of the common ambitions, priorities and key actions that we repeatedly heard throughout our strategy development. Next slide. Thank you. So the local nature recovery strategy sets out a vision, and that is for a well-connected, biodiversity-rich network of nature that is resilient into the future and restored for the health and well-being of future generations and for nature's own sake. So hopefully you can see how that links back to some of the issues I've flagged in terms of climate change and nature. We set out 3 principles. One is to enhance what we have. The second is to create more habitats to achieve a connected network for nature. And the third is to make space for nature everywhere. That's recognising the importance for people to experience nature in their everyday lives. Could I have the next slide, please? So the local nature recovery strategy has 4 components. One of those is the local habitat map, which is an interactive tool that I will take you through. And then we have 3 documents that form our statement of biodiversity priorities. They include a description of the strategy area, a list of habitat priorities and measures, and a list of species priorities and measures. And I'll take you through those 4 components to demonstrate how they can help you as communities, hopefully, to deliver actions and support the shared vision for a network of nature across the county. Next slide, please. So you can use the local nature recovery strategy to plan or scale up existing activities. Hopefully it will support you in accessing funding and also show you how your work supports Oxfordshire nature goals. Next slide. So the description of the strategy area is the sort of first overarching document. And in there you can find out more about nature and the challenges it faces, as well as connecting your local actions to national priorities. And the more that you know, the more you can confidently act and advocate. Next slide, please. The statement of biodiversity priorities identifies a whole series of different actions that you can have a look at to see if there's any your group could deliver. So that could include actions on gardens and allotments, religious grounds, sports pitches, woodlands and grasslands, or ponds and fens. And because we shaped these priorities with input from a wide range of different people, you can be sure that if you're delivering those, that you're contributing to Oxfordshire's nature recovery goals. Next slide, please. If you take a look at the species priority list, that will explain which species need extra help locally, which might live in your area and what you could do to help. The list includes a whole range of different species, but includes things such as hedgehogs, bats, swifts, various butterflies, house martins, and certain types of flowers, plants, and trees. So you can take a look at that list to see if there's any actions your group might be able to take. And you can also use the strategy as evidence to funders and with local people to show why the project matters and to explain what needs to happen. Next slide. Coming up, Catherine, there's a lot of clicking. So I'm going to take you through the local habitat map. So we recognise that there's some parts of Oxfordshire that are especially well suited for restoring and connecting areas of nature. So you can use this map to see if the strategy has mapped particular actions near your area that your group could help with. You can use it as part of your ecological evidence to support funding applications, but you can adapt the recommendations to suit your space, budget and time. And it's important to remember that even if your community area isn't mapped, there are still plenty of actions your group can take that have been identified across the whole county. Next slide, please.
There we go.
Okay, so the local habitat map is linked off the main local nature recovery strategy page, which you can get from that QR code that we can share. This is the zoomed out view showing the whole of Oxfordshire. And Catherine, if you'd be okay to click through a couple of slides, that zooms us in. Or maybe back one, sorry. Thank you. So at this level, you can see some orange areas. Those are our core areas. They're existing areas of importance for biodiversity and include designated sites like SSSIs and local wildlife sites, as well as irreplaceable habitats like ancient woodlands. Then the green areas are our nature recovery zones, which is where we've mapped places which would be particularly important for taking action to create a connected network for nature. Catherine, if you'd like to click through another, I think 3 slides. So as you zoom in on the map, it reveals more detail about the variety of different measures which appear in different colours there. So we've zoomed in now into an area in West Oxfordshire in the Witchwood Forest area. Catherine, if you'd like to click through one more. So this slide just shows you how you can toggle the background and turn on things like aerial photography to help you understand the context of your site. Catherine, if you could click through again. And then this just shows you can toggle on and off the local nature recovery strategy mapping. If you could click through again, Catherine. So if you then click on the map in a particular area, it will bring up a box that tells you what potential measures, those are actions, that you could take in that area that would particularly contribute to a nature recovery network. Usually a place has several measures identified for it. So here we can see there are 5 measures for this particular area. The first one that comes up is to create areas of calcareous species-rich grasslands. Catherine, if you could click through. Thank you. So we've also got a measure for creating ponds, one for creating habitat for the dark green fritillary butterfly. If we could click through again. One for creating a matrix of different habitat types, and I think there's one more, Catherine. Thank you. And that's just showing about the reminder that there can be measures that you could take that are relevant all across the county. So Catherine, if you could click through again, please. So the habitat map and the measures that come up link to our species priorities list and our habitats list. So you might have noticed there was a measure there about the dark green fritillary. That corresponds to the species list, which identifies more detail about what we might like you to do that would help the dark green fritillary in that area, and links through to more information on partner websites, and also shows you a map of where we've got records of that species in the county. If you could click through, please, Catherine. And then the measures also relate to our habitat priorities list. So we saw a priority around creating species-rich calcareous grassland, and the habitat list will give you more detail about what we're looking for there. If you could click through to the next slide, please, Catherine. Oh yes, this is just, we added a new tool which is quite useful. You can select a particular area and then export that data if you're producing your own reports or plans, which I think some groups will find particularly useful. If you could click through again, please, Catherine, you'll be pleased now it's the end of the mapping bit with all the clicking. So that's a summary of how you can use the local nature recovery strategy to help guide actions you might want to take on the ground. We also hope that it will be useful, even if you're not taking action on the ground, if you want to advocate for nature and get involved in planning policy. So you can use it to support you taking part in planning consultations. So local authorities do have a duty to have regard to the local nature recovery strategy. You can also use it in conversations with local councils or on consultations for creation of neighbourhood plans. We'd like to remind you can report your local wildlife sightings to support research and share your records with the Thames Valley Environmental Records Centre. And you can also use the LNRS to help you run workshops and talks to raise awareness. If we could have the next slide, please. So I'm going to quickly whiz through this because I think I might be taking up too much time. But in summary, the LNRS is a collaboratively created tool offering a blueprint for nature recovery actions. It will take all of us to deliver this in a joined up manner, and you don't have to undertake the actions the LNRS identifies. They are recommendations, not prescriptions. Just to flag that some habitat actions will require permissions before you take them. So just because it mapped doesn't bypass any permission requirements. And on the ground checks are also still likely key to fully consider what the best action is to take. Next slide, please. So the LNRS is intended to incentivise, not to constrain. So just because a landowner's land is mapped, it doesn't mean they have to deliver those actions. Next slide, please. And in terms of what's next, so in 3 to 10 years' time, we will have to review and republish the LNRS. But in the meantime, we have received a little extra funding from DEFRA to allow us to continue working in partnership with and through the local nature partnership to help people to use and understand the LNRS, to embed it into local decision making, identify and support strategic projects to develop and deliver actions, build the strategy into local decision making, across public bodies, and to monitor and evaluate actions being delivered across the county. Next slide, please. So finally, I'll leave you with this one, which is just some ideas of what you could do now using the local nature recovery strategy data. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Becky. And I recognize that this is a whistle-stop tour through a lot of different areas. And so while we're not necessarily taking questions in the webinar itself, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them either in this meeting or afterwards. So yeah, I recognize we're just kind of whizzing through these things. Okay, I will now turn it over to Alice, the team leader for flood risk management, to talk to us about the flood toolkit.
Great. I'm hoping you can see my screen. If you can let me know.
Loading for me at least. Yeah, got it.
Great. Okay, so good evening, everyone. My name is Alice Dimmerline. I work in the flood risk management team here at Oxfordshire County Council as the team leader. So Tom has given a great introduction into flood risk and the need to prepare for this. So I'm going to be now providing an overview of our flood toolkit website, some of its key functions and resources, as well as our volunteer flood warden scheme and our priority action grants. So just as a bit of background, OCC is the lead local flood authority for the county under the Flood and Water Management Act. We are responsible for coordinating the management of flood risk from surface water, groundwater and ordinary watercourses. So that's any watercourse not defined by the Environment Agency as main river, so usually streams and ditches. So some of our key responsibilities under the Act are developing and maintaining a local flood risk management strategy, partnership working with other risk management authorities, establishing and maintaining a register of flood risk related assets, and formal flood investigations, which are known as Section 19 flood reports. So to help us achieve some of these statutory duties and keep communities and residents informed about flooding across Oxfordshire, the Flood Toolkit website was developed. And the website provides information that can be used before, during and after a flood event. And I'll put the link to the website in the chat after the presentation in case you're not aware of where to find it. So there's lots of information for residents, businesses, riparian owners and local groups about flood risk and how you can prepare and educate yourself before a flooding event occurs. So some of the key information on the toolkit is about understanding your risk. So this could be done by looking at our flood risk asset register map, which includes the Environment Agency flood risk maps, which I'll cover a bit later on in the slides. Information on flood risk can also be enhanced by signing up to flood warnings, and the links for these are provided on the flood toolkit. There's also information pages about riparian responsibilities. So riparian owners are responsible for maintaining the watercourses or ditch running through or adjacent to their land, as well as the vegetation on the banks, in order to keep these clear and prevent flooding. So we've got lots of helpful guides on riparian ownership and flood risk throughout the flood toolkit. So they're a great resource for local communities to be looking at. So there's also guides and examples of how residents can protect their properties by using property flood resilience measures, which are commonly called PFR measures. So PFR is the term used to describe the ways in which a property can be protected from flood damage. So the two main strategies used are resistance and recoverability. So a flood resilience approach aims to prevent water entry or reduce the amount of flood water that enters a property, and it requires the purchase and installation of home flood defence products. So these products can be permanent or temporary and include flood doors, windows, non-return valves and air brick covers, things like that. So then there's flood recoverability measures, which aim to reduce the impact and damage caused by floodwater once it enters a property, resulting in quick and easier cleaning, drying, recovery, and reoccupation of the property. So examples of these include things like raising electricity sockets, lime render on walls, flood alarms, raising appliances, and you can even get things like kitchen fittings that are made of water-resistant material so that they can just be wiped down after a flood event rather than needing to be replaced. It is important to note that before PFR measures can be installed, a survey needs to be carried out. The surveys can help to identify the most suitable resistance and recoverability measures to help protect your home against flooding. The survey should be carried out by experienced property flood resilience professionals and should consider flood risk, water entry points and thresholds, and the suitability of any resistance or recoverability measures for both the property and its residents, with considerations to cost restrictions. So both PFR surveys and installation need to be carried out by suitably qualified companies. And we have a whole page for this on the Flood Toolkit website, and more information can also be found on the Flood Hub and the Blue Pages, which are linked on this slide and are also linked on the Flood Toolkit. So we have useful information on the Flood Toolkit for residents and businesses to use during an emergency. So we always advise, if there is danger to life, to phone Oxfordshire Fire and Rescue on 999. If there is not a danger to life, there are other key contact information under the It's an Emergency tab, such as the OCC out of hours number and the Environment Agency floodline numbers, Thames Water, etc. So during flooding events, we often update the homepage of the Flood Toolkit with some key information around flood recovery and things. So it's always useful to keep an eye out on the Flood Toolkit. The graph on the slide demonstrates the number of people visiting the toolkit. So the blue line shows the number of visits throughout September 2024. And you can see the significant increase in page visits from the 23rd of September, when Oxfordshire experienced extremely high levels of rainfall across the county. So following a flood event, we encourage residents and communities to report flood incidents to us by filling out the Report of Flood form on the Flood Toolkit. This is an online form which captures a variety of information from the incident, such as location, date, cause, and you can even upload photos and videos to the file. The form is then sent straight through to our team to log and investigate in partnership with other risk management authorities. So it's important to note that the form and inbox is for reporting incidences of flooding with a view to investigating events that have already occurred. So it's not an emergency response service, and it's not monitored 24 hours, evenings and weekends. All of the reports are logged, and this data is mapped on our internal asset register. And then we use this information to identify areas that flood regularly, which can then lead to things like increased maintenance of assets or areas to target community engagement events and volunteer schemes. Information on flood recovery can be found under the Help and Flooding tab at the top of the website. There are step-by-step guides on what needs to be done, which is really useful because it follows an order in which they need to be done. There's also phone numbers provided to the National Flood Forum and Citizens Advice, who can help provide additional support and information to people affected by flooding. Following major storm events, the government may announce funding to assist residents and businesses who are impacted by flooding. So following the flooding caused by Storm Henk back in January 2024, the government opened up a number of funding schemes. So this was run by DEFRA and the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and they're responsible for determining and activating these funding streams. So information about funding following flooding is posted on the Flood Toolkit website, advising residents how they can apply for it and offering support. So OCC were eligible to apply for these grants back in 2024, and one of which was for residents to install property flood resilience measures, such as flood barriers and pumps and the things that I covered earlier. And we successfully granted 40 applications, which totaled around 150k worth of PFR grants. So any new information that comes out from the government on grants will be posted here. So following flood events, the LLFA will undertake investigations of the source of the flooding and make recommendations that could reduce future risk. Most of these investigations are based off of flood reports which have come in from the Flood Toolkit. However, we also receive flood reports from risk management authorities, fire and rescue, district councils, and places like that. So some events will meet our threshold to undertake a formal Section 19 flood investigation report. Our current threshold for completing these can be seen on the slide. And the most common reason for completing them is when 5 or more properties suffer internal flooding. So investigations will be undertaken in partnership with the district and city councils, the Environment Agency, other risk management authorities, and the communities that were impacted. Updates on the investigations and the finalised reports are then published on the flood toolkits for residents and authorities to view. These investigations are then used for various pieces of work, such as evidence to fund small-scale works, implement flood wardens in the communities, which I will cover later on in the presentation. So under the Flood and Water Management Act, we must establish and maintain a register of structures or features that are likely to have a significant effect on flood risk. And we have an external version of our asset register available on the Flood Toolkit for members of the public and our volunteers to use. So you can see this on the slide here. The asset register is an interactive map showing things like highway assets, Environment Agency flood risk maps, critical infrastructure, things like that. So the assets can be clicked on and more information will show in a pop-up. So you can see on the slide here that I've clicked on a highway gully and it will pop up and tell you sort of things like who owns it and when it was last inspected. So this can also be used to view the Environment Agency flood risk maps, so the risk of flooding from rivers and sea or the risk of flooding from surface water, which can be used to understand which counties or towns are at risk or have the most risk of flooding. So this map has been extremely helpful for residents and businesses to understand what flood risk and drainage assets are in their local area. So I'm now going to provide some information on our volunteer flood warden scheme, which we are now running county-wide. So the LLFA recognises that local community residents are well placed to provide information concerning flood risk and drainage issues. Flood wardens are the eyes and ears on the ground and report things like blocked drains, gullies and ditches to the LLFA. It is hoped that these actions could help prevent or reduce flood risk in local communities. So we currently have flood wardens in Witney, Ascot under Wychwood, Sunningwell, Abingdon, Kidlington, Islip and Steventon. So all of these locations were selected following significant flooding events. So we are expanding the scheme further following the successful pilot that we ran, and future areas for expansion will be based on locations that have suffered flooding in the past. Flood wardens can use all the information on the flood toolkit to aid them in their role. And one thing our flood wardens use a lot is our flood risk asset register map to learn sort of what key assets or watercourses and the flood risk is in the local areas. So flood wardens are members of the local community. They can be individuals, representatives of the parish council or existing volunteers throughout the council already. Individuals and communities can play a vital role in looking after themselves and supporting others. So volunteers can help in building resilience to flooding on a local level, as well as face the challenges of adapting to the impacts of climate change. So flood wardens, like I said earlier, can monitor things like blocked drains and culverts, ditches, obstructions in rivers and watercourses, and anything else that may cause a flood risk, and report this back to us or the local appropriate land, property or local authority. So they support the community by providing local knowledge and resources to help themselves during an emergency. There are no set hours the volunteers have to do, and it is up to the individuals if they want to link up with other volunteers in the area. Some of the locations we have, volunteers like Witney have set up a WhatsApp chat to communicate with each other during a flooding event and collate information. We have found this extremely useful for gathering information during and after flooding events. So the flood wardens are provided with an online training session to go over the role and the useful resources and information. We also show them around the Flood Toolkit website and how to use the mapping and log flood reports. They are also provided with helpful documents such as a flood warden handbook and guidance on who they can contact. And we touch base with our volunteers regularly, and now the scheme has expanded. We are looking to have an annual in-person workshop with all the volunteers. So just a quick example of where we have run a flood warden scheme successfully is in Sunningwell. So this location originally flooded in March 2023, which initiated an investigation by the District Council. And then we also produced a Section 19 flood investigation report for this. And as part of this process, we met with the residents in the parish council to gain an understanding of the issues in this location. And we also signed up 3 volunteer flood wardens following the publication of the Section 19 report. Sunningwell then unfortunately flooded again in January 2024 during Storm Henk, and the local flood wardens used their knowledge and understanding during and after the event. So they confirmed the recommendations within the original Section 19 report were still valid and how they performed, and they provided us and the District Council with data and information from the event, which aided in the information sharing and supported the parish and the rest of the community during and after the event. So we are actively trying to expand the flood warden network across the county. We usually approach town and parish councils to explain the scheme and provide them with some text that can be included in local newsletters or social media to advertise for volunteers on our behalf. So I've put our team email address on the slide. If anybody is interested in volunteering or would like more information on it to advertise in their local area, then please get in touch and we'll be more than happy to have a discussion around this. So I'm now going to move on to our priority action grants. So the flood risk management team successfully ran and funded priority action flood projects for the financial year 2024-25. So the success of the grants allowed us to reopen application for grants for this financial year. So the purpose of these priority action projects is for communities to deliver small-scale works to reduce flooding from surface water runoff, ordinary watercourses and groundwater. So the projects are typically delivered through the parish or district. However, we do now have the option to use OCC's minor groundworks framework to also deliver the schemes. So we open expressions of interest for grants once a year. Applications have now closed for this financial year, and we're currently progressing around 40 projects. However, it's very likely that we'll reopen this up again next year, which will be our 3rd round of grants. So when we do this, all the parish and town councils will be contacted directly, and it will also be advertised on our Flood Toolkit website. So there is an upper limit of 25,000 per project of funding available from OCC, and we consider both full and partial funding of projects. So the kind of projects this funding could be used for includes, but is not limited to at all, small flood storage areas, embankments or channels, culvert and pipe removal, improvements on ordinary watercourses, natural flood management, installing sustainable drainage systems, or even just improving community resilience through awareness. So some examples of the schemes we've delivered in the last financial year can be seen on the slide. And then this map just gives a rough idea of the spread of the projects across the county, which we have delivered, and some that are also still ongoing in this financial year. So like I said previously, we're more than likely be able to offer these grants again in the next financial year. So we'll be in touch with parish and district councils once we open expressions of interest again. So hopefully that's given you a quick overview of our team and the Flood Toolkit, which has got some great resources for preparing for flooding, reporting flooding, flood recovery and grants, and our Flood Warden scheme and Priority Action scheme. So if you've got any questions or would like any more information on the Flood Warden scheme or the grants or anything like that, then please get in touch with our team email address, which is on the slide there. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Alice. Lovely. So we are now going to go to Andy, and again, we are just powering through. Climate adaptation is not for the faint of heart. So if you need to get up and stretch or do whatever to make yourself comfortable as we keep whizzing through this, please do. Andy, so we've got until 8:25. Sorry, we've got until 8:10 for including the breakout groups for scenario planning. So Andy's going to present, and then we will move into an interactive bit. So your time to speak is coming. So does that sound good, Andy, in terms of sort of how you then think about the next 8, 10,
Yep.
15, yeah, 25 minutes? Great. All right,
Yep.
we'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Can I just check? Can you all see my screen okay?
Yes, looks great.
Right. Excellent. So yeah, I guess I'm following on what Tom and what Alice have said there. So I'm from the Joint Oxfordshire Resilience team. The clues in the title, we talk about resilience. So I'm going to look at how we can become resilient to climate change, or to how we can manage some of the impacts of climate change. But actually, resilience, there are all sorts of things that we need to be resilient from. Actually, if we can be resilient to adverse weather and things like that, we're going to be resilient to a lot of other types of risks as well. And that's what I'm going to focus on today. So we have a number of different things that we do right now to help communities become more resilient to different types of emergencies. And you're going to hear me talk a lot tonight about community emergency plans. So those are plans, excuse me, developed by individual communities. And it's really about working out how you can come together when something unexpected happens. Communities who are more resilient tend to recover quicker and easier and faster to different types of emergencies. Thinking about other plans that we have, so there are SWEP plans, so severe weather emergency protocols. These are normally the district councils. So normally it has been cold weather based SWEP protocols, but we now have high heat SWEP protocols as well. And that's about how so when we have these severe weather coming in, how we warn and inform the public about what they can do to cope with either hot or cold weather. In terms of our team as well, we have various county plans that we write for the county council, and we share and collaborate with the district councils and other agencies across the county. Those are all sorts of different response plans. So some will be adverse weather plans. Some will be, plans for things that go bang or things that go crash or any type of incident or emergency. And obviously, we provide, when we're working in adverse conditions, we provide PPE to our staff so they can work in those conditions. But also, if we have emergency volunteers working for us, they'll be provided with the correct PPE as well. Excuse me there. And of course, the other thing that we look at as well is as the local authority, it's really important that we can keep delivering our services, even when something unexpected happens. It's no good us stopping because there's an emergency. We're here to help our communities. So we have different ways of working, and we can adjust the way we work, locations, times, and how we prioritize different activities to make sure that we still provide our services when emergencies are happening. And the two things I just want to sort of focus on here a little bit. So first one is the Priority Services Register. So I don't know if how many people on this webinar have heard of that before. I promote that a lot, as much as possible. So you can sign up with your utility supplier, so gas, electricity or water. If you meet certain vulnerability criteria, if there's a problem with that particular provision of that utility, you will get a phone call or some sort of additional support if you need it to overcome that problem. And I think when we go into one of the breakout sessions later, I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. And Alice, you've done a great job there promoting the Oxfordshire Flood Toolkit. I'm totally on board with this bus. It's a fantastic resource. If you haven't seen it or used it, please do click on it. Please do make yourself familiar with it. There's lots of really helpful and useful information on there. So I've talked a lot about, normally when we're doing this, we're talking about communities, residents, but actually it's not just about the people, it's about the businesses as well. There are large businesses, but there are lots of small businesses as well. If you go up and down your high street, it's all those small to medium enterprises. It's really important that they're resilient to different types of incident, emergencies, climate adaptation as well. So we have various resources that we make available to them. So there's advice on our website. We have various booklets and leaflets that they can look through to look what they can do to make their businesses slightly more resilient to different types of incidents and emergencies, be it flooding or something else. But a lot of what we do is working directly with the community. So it's events like this, but we go out to various community events. We go out to various parish council meetings. We work with OALC and various agencies like agencies and groups like that. The WI is a fantastic group that we do quite a lot of presentations with, similar to this, but they've got a great reach out to their communities as well. So that's a fantastic resource for us. I've talked about priority service registers. Another thing that we talk about a lot are the in case of emergency bottles. So I don't know if people have heard of those before, but they're really useful to have. So that's something, if you think about vulnerable person, you might be somebody living on your own and you have medication that you need to take. You can write all your important details on a piece of paper inside the bottle. You put a sticker on the inside of your door and you put that bottle with your important information inside the fridge. And if emergency services ever need to access your property because you've called 999 and you're incapacitated, they see the sticker on your door that tells them there's a bottle in the fridge with all your important information on it. So if you're a vulnerable person or if you live by yourself, it's a really important or really good way of communicating really vital information in those emergencies. And the other thing that we do as well, we do support various communities to apply for grants from SSEN. That opens up about once a year or so, but it's a grants that you can apply for various measures that might help to make your community more resilient. So one of the things that that happens all the time, actually, we've all had power cuts before, but I think it was one of the speakers earlier spoke about different storms that we've had coming through the county. So it wasn't Storm Henk, it was the one before that. I've forgotten the actual name of it, but in 2021. So we had high winds coming across the county and it blew loads of power lines down all around the county, lots of people without power. So if that ever happens to you, you can call 105. You can tell the supplier that you're without power. If you're on the priority services register, they can find your details and then give you support and advice about how long the outage will probably last. And these are the types of leaflets and sort of material that we can hand out to community groups. This is all online as well. So if you want to add a link to these into your plans, that's something that you can do. I'll go from the left of the screen, community emergency plans. So it's really important that communities have some sort of plan in place about what they're going to do when emergencies happen. And a community, it could be anything. I think typically we talk about parish councils, town councils, but it could be a faith community. It could be a business community. It could be a community in a particular street or a couple of roads who decide to come together and put some sort of a plan in place about what that community is going to do when an emergency happens and how they're going to communicate, how they're going to manage, and how they're going to help each other to overcome whatever that problem is. Utility failure. So I've talked about electricity, but it's also water and gas as well. So those are key utilities. So that tells you what you can do if you have a problem with either of those utilities. Again, it talks about the priority services register, signposts people to advice, and the things that you can do when these types of things happen. And I've talked about business continuity a little bit, but the one on the end there, are you ready? This is a really everything that you need guide in terms of becoming more resilient as individuals, but also becoming more resilient as communities. So whether that's about having a community emergency plan or a community flood plan or some sort of structure in place which makes it easier for people to come together when these types of incidents happen, whether it be adverse weather or whatever it is, so we can sort of look after each other, look after the most vulnerable people in society. Now, anybody who's lived in Oxfordshire for more than 12 months will be fully aware that we're quite a low-lying county. It's very wet, and we've got quite large catchments all around the county. So I think a couple have mentioned this already. I think, Alice, you've mentioned it. Really important to sign up for flood warnings and flood alerts. So you can get all this information on the flood toolkit as well. But like, everything, anything in life, there's lots of information out there. You can sign up for all these different alerts, and everybody has their own different risk tolerance. So, somebody who may be, I don't know, fairly fit and able, will have a different idea of risk to somebody who's maybe living by themselves and maybe has some sort of vulnerability. So we can't make assumptions about how these different risks will impact people, but we can give them the information and they can decide for themselves how that risk could impact them. So really important, if you are in those risk areas or you do have a concern, to make sure that you are signed up for these types of warnings. And again, so gov.uk, there's lots of information on there about community emergency plans. And I think, nationally, there's a much sort of wider conversation going on at the moment as well about resilience and what resilient communities look like. It's resilient to not just flooding events, not just high heat, not just extreme cold, those climate type events that we do see every year. It's about becoming resilient to all different types of incidents and emergencies that can impact us and impact our communities. I think, like I said at the start, if we work together to become more resilient to different types of risk, we will be more resilient to all the other types of risks. So, if you live in an area where flooding occurs or is likely to occur, if you come together to build a community flood plan or a community emergency plan, that will be just as relevant and just as useful if it's some other type of risk that occurs besides flooding as well. So it is about that whole of society resilience that we really try to promote. And if anybody wants help building their own community emergency plan or community flood plan, you can contact our team. And we can help you to do that. There are various templates which you can go through, and we can support you to do that. So the types of people that we work with, I'm not going to read through all those names on the slide there, but we do as much as possible with communities to try to promote that idea around resilience and to make people aware of all the resources that are available to help them create these emergency plans or flood plans, so that when these incidents happen, you can become more resilient to it. We are there to support you. That's our role. And it's really important to think about who might be vulnerable as well. And this is why we have these, or why we ask people to have these plans, because, I'm based in an office in Kidlington. I live in Didcot. So if flooding or adverse weather or something is happening up in Banbury, I don't know your area as well as you know your area. And the whole point of having those community emergency plans and those community flood plans, you know your area, you know your risks, you know your residents much better than I ever will. So when those incidents happen, it's about us being able to come to you, or you being able to come to us, and you can give us that real clear information about what's happening on the ground to make sure that we can get to these vulnerable people and give people the support that they need.
All right, Andy, what can you whiz through in 2 minutes?
I can whiz through a little bit about community emergency plans. Although, to be fair, I think I've probably said this already. So we ask all communities to produce a community emergency plan. We will support. I've said, so often it's a parish or town, but it can be any type of community. We've got our leaflets that will support you and give you guidance. There's a bit of a template. So it doesn't have to be complicated. What a community emergency plan is, it's a list of people who can stand up and come together and start working for their community to help that community through whatever that incident or emergency is. I'll stop there because the next bit I was going to go through was a bit of a scenario where a community emergency plan might be useful, but I think that will be more useful in the breakout session.
So that's great, Andy, and sorry to rush you. I do think this is really interesting and is something that of the community groups and members we've talked to, they're really interested in. So do you want to introduce the scenario that we're going to discuss in the breakout groups?